And thanks for staying with us here on The Pulse. It's time now to go into what plan we have as a nation in dealing with this perennial problem of flooding. And fortunate to have Dr. Kojo Abrampa, who's the Director General of the National Development Planning Commission, joining us in studio. He's my guest for today here on The Pulse. Such a pleasure of having you in our studios.
Thank you.
When we talk about flooding, many believe that, well, it's a problem that we can't solve as a nation, so let's just live with it. What do you have in your books as to what Ghanaians, first of all, think about the situation and as to whether or not we are in a position to solve this?
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to talk once again about the flooding issue in the country. We can solve it. There's no problem which is unsurmountable. Definitely we can. But it also depends on the process and the approach that we are undertaking. And I think that it is also multifaceted, and that is why it takes a long time for you to feel the impact and even see what we are doing in the positive direction. We have a concerted plan which is looking at a quite comprehensive, dating 30 years, looking ahead. Why? Because as it is for our country, parts of our country are generally below sea level. And once you are below sea level, it means that the water table is very high. Mm-hmm. So just a little downpour is already flooded. And therefore, you need to look at how we plan towards that. Unfortunately, our national capital falls within that range of just a short few amount of rain, and we are already there. So if you look at the past, the plan had been leaving what we call the pools or the ponds. And these are natural ponds. Right. So if you look at the plan of Accra, way back in 1963, those who designed it, they left a lot of these areas for it to be guarded and water collecting there after rains. One of it, which is quite popular now, is what we call the lakeside. So that whole area is a natural pond, deliberately created and left by the planners for it to be used as a collecting point. And then the water eases off or it evaporates. There's another one near Atomic. Mm-hmm. There's another one near Dansuma. Okay. And then there are about 7 of them. In fact, Rage happens to be one of them. So if you look at Rage, the way the colonial masters, for instance, built the place, they leave out what they call the stitches, the pillars, and then the water flows. There's another one near Teshi. Unfortunately for us, we have not been quite meticulous in protecting these areas. I go through some of the areas in Accra, and you find out that all these places practically have become built, except the Atomic area.
And the reason why we're bringing you into this conversation is because we believe that as part of the solution, we cannot leave out the NDPC.
Definitely, yes.
Right. And I'm, in fact, surprised to know that you have a blueprint which could potentially solve this problem. Yes. What's the name of this document and what's it seeking?
It's a GIP, the Ghana Infrastructure Plan. And this was completed and launched in 2018. Right. It's supposed to go all the way to 2047 to guide us in our infrastructure development. We will say that the accounts have a proverb, very funny proverb, but so those that we could not protect, we need to leave it behind, and going forward, we need to protect it. Those ones that we can. Mm-hmm. So we're working with other ministries, and that is the essence of NDPC. It works as a range of ministries, because if you look at flooding, it's concerned the Ministry of Local Government, it's concerned Works and Housing, it's concerned finance, sanitation, all that, environment. Ministry of Science, Environment.
In fact, it concerns every single
So we need to work in concession. Mm-hmm. That is the essence of putting this infrastructure together. Mm-hmm. And so moving forward, we are put it in ranges. If you look at the plan, short term, what do we need to do? The medium term, what do you need to do? And then the long term, what we need to do. The short term mostly concerns with responding to emergencies when these floods come up, while dealing with the minor issues where we can marshal up and mobilize the resources to deal with. One of it is to prevent the water from coming in. So 2 areas. looking at the coastal areas, and this has been responded to largely. If you look at the western part, the central region, all those areas have been responded to going to a Volta region and the other areas. The other range has to do with the source of these water flows. If you look at Accra, the problem is not Accra Plains. The problem is coming from the ridge, the Kwapim Ridge.
Right.
Because the water flows from there, and it comes with silts. When it comes to silt, what happens is that almost all the drains, after a heavy rainfall, are filled with this silt. Because up the Kwapim Hill too, we have the sandstone. Okay. And once people continue to construct on the Kwapim Hill, they are getting the soil loosened up.
Right.
And once the soil loosens up, once it rains, it comes down with it, blocks the drains. And then when it blocks the drains, it's not able to retain the water, but the water begins to spread. Right. And the hydrological department has a different scenario of this, showing how much of excess water gets into Accra anytime it rains. So we need to solve the problem. First, it has to do with controlling the building activities on the top. And unfortunately, you drive now towards Eburi, Pediase, you look on your left and right, and the construction activities going on is enormous, as if we don't have people assigned to manage and control.
But if you want to face this, it will still come back to the political class, isn't it? And these are people that you cannot easily eject out of that place.
Well, everybody is a human being, and it takes people who have responsibility for that to make sure that it's done. They have district chief executive, municipal chief executives, who are responsible for these areas.
But it's not as easy. That's my point. It's not as easy as you're making it sound.
It is, but it takes. It's not just coming out with brute force, but it takes dialogue.
Right.
Sometimes it takes realization. People who are constructing over there sometimes do not even know the impact. So it takes, being also aware of some of the nuisance you're causing within the whole range of areas down to Accra. Look at all the facilities and properties and down there, you're creating a problem for them. So we need to solve this problem not only by using brute force or anything like that, but also engage in dialogue, engage in conversation. There is no piece of land in Ghana which is not owned by a chief. To what extent do we engage them in solving this problem? Do we make it just through the formal system, official system, or do we engage these owners for them also to know? Because eventually they give out the land.
But this is reversing and negating the long-held perception that the problem has been downstream, where we've seen heightened use of polythene products. Have you had that discussion? What's your survey telling you? What is that telling you? Because initially, I thought you were going to refer simply to this case of pollution and the use of polythene bags and all that.
Part of the problem.
It's not been the major headache.
It is a minute part of the problem.
Really?
But it's also the easiest to deal with. People pouring refuse into the gutters and the drains and all that. It's a minute part of the problem, but the easier part to deal with it. Then you need to look at the whole range of waste management process. But it's one area which we also feel gratifying because we realize that it is reducing. It is one area where it's reduced. The amount of waste that gets into the system is gradually reducing. There's been a long discussion just about a month ago on the blue economy. And one of the things which came up with dealing with these plastics. And the Ministry of Water and Sanitation is really, really working on that. And it's quite gratifying. That is just one part. The other part, which has not been dealt with, is the technical part. The size of the drains and other things. And the hydrological department has done a lot of simulation on that, but it requires huge amount of resource outlay to be able to accomplish it. And if you look at the amount that we also have, what I call free balance to be used for capital investment, and compared to how much that area alone requires, it means that it's going to take us quite a long time to be able to do that.
But it's not as though we've not seen interventions. For instance, that there's this, and there is still the Garrett project, for instance. I recall speaking to, management of that framework. And part of the complaint is that, yes, we want to run the project, but when you come downstream, there are people who are equally developing significant properties around the drains. You don't want to clear them as well.
This is it. This is what I said. The Garrett project is you're looking at it in a comprehensive manner. to deal with the whole problem together. It involves more than 8 municipalities working together, some of it even from Eastern region, others in Central region. So pulling all these together.
What do you recommend? Demolishing the structures?
Look, if there's a need to demolish one to be able to save 10, and I am a planner, I look at the cost benefits. Why do you have to keep it? Because when it floods, it doesn't, and if you look at the simulation which they've developed, it's going to affect a whole range of buildings. So if you deal with one, take away one, and then save about 20. Why wouldn't we do that? We should be able to do that. And more so when you do not have the necessary permit, you do not get it registered, the land use and special planning unit did not give you the permit, EPA did not give you a permit, and you put up a structure there, which is again affecting legally constructed facilities, then we don't see the reason why it should be here. And that's what makes us a state. Right. A state means that you are balancing interest, and more so making sure that laws are effected, implemented, and yield the result that are expected from your people. And that is why, if you look at recently, look at the land use and planning, special planning unit, it's a whole retooling going on. There's a whole restructuring of the system. They move from MST to local government so as to strengthen and work directly with the district chief executive, municipal chief executive on this matter. And this is an area where, again, Ministry of Works and Housing, practically its whole budget is looking at drains. They're working a lot in that area because it's not just Accra, it's Sekondi Takoradi, it is Kumasi, it is Tamale. And these are areas where we have our properties and including national strategic investment, which are all vulnerable to this process. And so it's an area that if you look at the infrastructure plan, we devoted a lot of time, brains, and all that we need to do, like Gary is doing, to be able to segment it and implement.
I'm looking at the money. Doc, how much will it cost Ghana to effectively tackle this issue of flooding?
I will not hazard a figure now, but I'm sure if I go to the details of the plan, it brings out phase by phase. Okay. If every district assembly in this country can devote 30% of its resources over the range of time, which means that our collective budget, 30% of it over a range of time, given that we are also satisfying all the essential requirements, we should be able to do that. But 30% is enormous, given how much of our budget we devote for infrastructure for that matter and CAPEX. It is huge.
So you haven't put a cost to
we have done that. I must say that. But
do you have a rough figure of how much it's looking like?
I will not hazard it because we're in the problem.
Are you not being diplomatic because you know the money is simply something we cannot afford?
I'm not being diplomatic, but as I said, if you quote 30% and you have a capex of about an average of about 10% a year, forget about the arrears which we need to pay, then it means that it's quite something which is challenging to the country. Notwithstanding that, a huge range of this can be changed by our own attitudes. Okay. So a huge proportion of the resources can be saved if attitudes of the people and the way we do our things change with respect to construction, with respect to sanitation, with respect to our usual habit of digging anywhere, cutting any tree anywhere. This can save us a lot. And these are immediate things which can be done without much resources going there. That is it. So I call it the soft, cheaper side.
That we could deal with without necessarily being fixated on the money.
Exactly.
But how about the timelines? And I see that the document you're talking about is a long-term strategy. Yes. This will transcend governments. We need to be, we need to be very factual about it. That's a long-term vision.
Yes, it is. Let me say that it's already transcended the government already. Right. Because it was started at the time that we had the 2015. And it's gone all the way through to 2018. So it's gone through 2 governments in terms of the planning. So it's not looking at any particular government, it's looking at Ghana as a whole and how we can deal with this problem. What we are doing now is to look at the short-term things. So one of it, which I've mentioned, is the coastal area. It's essential. The second one is Garrett, which is very, very essential. There's also a process ongoing for Kumasi. There's another one, Tamale. The whole commercial area is a challenge when it rains. And some of the areas which has to do with the slums. So the slum areas are critical. So an area around Nima and the other areas, we are looking at reinforcing some of these drainage facilities. And you could see it in last year's budget of Ministry of Works and Housing. So there are shorter ones which are critical. If we are able to deal with the retaining pond at Atomic, I tell you, it will save a lot downstream. And that's part of the Garrett project. Unfortunately, there's a big challenge we're already facing. As we are saving that space, people are also building.
Yeah.
And so it's a big challenge which is confronting the...
What did you recommend in this document on that?
Basically, what we said was making sure that we effect these laws. And then effecting that law and implementing that law led to the restrengthening of LUSPA, which is very, very important. Now it's worked directly with the district assembly. So if assembly detects the problem, it doesn't need to go to another ministry to solve it. It is there with them. And we have, all the assemblies now have fiscal planning departments. So once they determine this structure hasn't got a permit, they have every right to deal with it. The other thing is dealing with the judicial process, because you need a permit to be able to pull down somebody's structure. So that is one area to where there's a lot of collaboration over the period with the judicial service to expedite this. And so these are all the systems we are putting in place. The key thing in the first leg is to put in the systems. Once the systems are established and the capacity is provided, we're very sure that we'll be able to deal with that. And if you have a shorter period, you know very well that, look, they go to court within a month, your structure will be pulled down. Nobody would dare put down a structure without being registered. But if you know that, well, there could be a whole litigation over 10 years, by the time you might even be dead, then you can take the risk.
Let's wrap up on the issue of legislation, because that will be critical going forward. At least if there's a law that gives an upper hand in terms of financial allocation and also dealing with the structural challenges that we face, it will be a lot more easier. What are you considering, putting on the table for policymakers to consider in terms of which kind of laws we should be considering now and what timelines we should be applying to?
In terms of laws and policies, basically what we've been doing throughout the period, in the short-term period, is harmonization. Why? Because a lot of them are already existing. The LUSPA Act, which is not old, it's just 2016, which was passed 2020, it started full effectiveness and blast of it. We have also the Local Government Act, which is also not old. It is also 2016. So a lot of that have been done. It looks at, and then the financing part of it, the PFM Act. So a lot of them exist. It's a matter of implementation. And what we saw was that the policy complementation is very, very important. They complemented each other, and also coordination for the implementation. So since last year, we've had series of meetings with group and institutions, departments, and all that. In fact, I just came from another meeting, which is looking at something else. So that's what we've been doing. And in my development coordination department has looked at this critically, how the institutions can work together and interpret the law in the same manner and act in the same manner, reinforcing each other. In a situation where the district assembly says that, you bring LUSPA, land use planning, they're also saying something else, then you have a problem. So this is the kind of thing we are doing, effective coordination, so that the implementation will be coordinated. Again, we're also looking at how resources flow could reinforce activities. So and then sequencing, so that if you are supposed to do A, you do it. B continues, C continues. If you are doing something like Garrett and pulling all this together in a sequential manner, we use that as a case and do that for the other.
Okay. Doc, one thing that I will take away with me after this conversation is the fact that there's also some level of divergence when it comes to long-term planning for the country. You agree with me?
Divergence in terms of...
We've not been consistent with our development policies. Okay. I recall that, for instance, when the NPP administration came into power, they dealt with and they are still dealing with the coordinated mechanism that's supposed to span, I guess, 8 years. The senior minister at the time was talking about it. Then there was the monitoring and evaluation ministry, the planning ministry at the time, doing a coordinated 8-year development plan, because Obviously, they did not believe in the 100-year or the previous one that was being done. How do we address this as a country?
It's very
long-term development.
People have complained about it, but it's more of a process than the issue is.
Right.
You see, every plan begins with a long-term plan, which is a perspective. It gives the general direction of where we want to go. And then a plan, in our Ghanaian case, is broken down into 8-year period, which is guided by our own constitution. So if you look at our constitution, 36.5 is very specific. Yeah. As soon as you are elected, you come out with a plan. The plan responds to a long-term perspective. The plan responds to a long-term, which is a technical document. The long-term plan is not a political document.
But you agree that there's always divergence in terms of how a government feels. Yes, right.
Once a long-term document is a technical document, the government comes in, having been elected and given the mandate of the people. But the government does what we call political technical dialogue. This is what you want to do. Then the technical people tell you this is the reality. You cannot do this in 4 years.
Right.
Because this is what the process is. So this is a dialogue, which is not a public thing.
Are you suggesting to us that there's a constitutional restriction to having a development framework that will guide each and every government that comes into power?
It's basically not a restriction. There's no restriction. It is done, but the processes, it is there which is done. But you can't restrict the government what to do because a plan is indicative.
Right.
What you want to do in 30 years, we don't have it. We have only used projections. So the reality is that when a person is elected, then you bring this is the situation. So this is what we wanted to do. This is the strategy we propose. But then planners, what we do is that we have also a 4-year plan. The 4-year plan identifies alternatives. Because then there has been a dialogue with the government. So these are the alternatives. You can do A, these are the implications. B, these are the implications. C, these are the implications. And the government has a choice among these alternatives. So in terms of the management, it's that people just assume that we don't have a long-term perspective. But there is always a long-term perspective. There's always been. Sometimes short-lived, sometimes reviewed. Just in 2021, we had to review all our plans because of the COVID. Because of the conflict. So we've done this review immediately.
So you don't believe in the long-term development policy?
No, we have it.
But that's okay. So let me reframe this. President Akufo-Addo is running with an 8-year long-term development plan. Is that the case? Beyond him, what then happens? That's my question. Why not have a single policy document that has all political parties revolving around
Sorry,
it?
You said President Akufo-Addo no. President Akufo-Addo is enjoined by the Constitution to come out with a program.
Okay.
As soon as the program
Which is running with.
As soon as the program is approved, it becomes a national program.
But he's restricted, as you're pointing to, 8 years. Beyond President Akufo-Addo, what happens?
You see, beyond President Akufo-Addo, we have a perspective plan, which is there.
But another government will come in and may not be compelled to use it. That's my fear.
The point is that we always say may not be compelled. But that is the process.
We've never seen that before, Doc. You agree?
That a government is what?
Will come in and continue what someone else has been doing.
A lot. You see, sometimes we say it because we look at the surface. The continuation is more about 70%.
Really?
Yes, it's more about 70%. We haven't gone to the ground to find out. And even those which are not continued by programs, very often, what happens is that governments, when they start a program, often do not have the full outlay of resource flow. So if I'm able to get 20% of it, let it go. When another government comes, there might be a lapse. And a lapse means that you have a liability to pay. That is it. So when a new government is elected, then they feel very uncomfortable taking up this liability before starting a new project. So then they look at the cost benefit. To be better if I start a new project, I'm going to pay this liability, which is there. So in order to cure that, in 2016, they came out with an act, which also has an LI, 2411, which says that for a government to start a major project, you must indicate the full resource flow. And there's a committee that polices this. So now it is established. And the committee is not just politicians. private sector, technical people who are on it. So this is the cure. So we realize that it is more economic for a reason why government do not continue with projects and less political. And that is it. Because every government would like to score a victory with completing a project.
So we're doing convenience politicking?
No, it's not convenient.
Yeah, because all governments will pick and choose. So wouldn't you suggest at this point that we bring up a law that will compel?
You see, if you bring up a law that will compel, reality speaks. So reality is better than comparing.
Right.
If you're saying that the law already exists in our constitution, 35(7), it says it. It said as far as practicable, you should continue.
Right.
So the constitution even gives a lapse there, a space for you to maneuver. So to make it practical, we say that if you start a project, give the full financial flow. So if the next government comes, they just follow. Because they know where the money is coming from, instead of going around and wasting time. And that is quite practical. Then tell somebody, I have a whip.
Yeah.
Hey, if you don't need this is the king. It's not realistic. So the reality is that let us have the resources. Right. And when there are resources, we have done it and the research shows, governments continue. Where they aren't, then you give them the chance to say, we're not going to continue.
Doc, we need to go. Any message for our viewers, Ghanaians out there?
Well, let me say that Ghanaian, one thing has been hammered over this year a lot. The mindset, attitudes. We realize that that's a huge cost for us, even for our development. The whole thing we're talking about, infrastructure, rests with that. Maintenance is an issue. People would like to see new things instead of maintaining what is there. This is an attitude. People would like to also, think about themselves, throw the waste into a drain, and they think they've solved their problem. But you are creating more problems for yourself and other people. So I would say that we're working on that. It starts from our children.
Yeah. Don't
tell the children, put the rubbish at the corner. If you do that, the person comes of age, they will do that. Yeah. You don't tell a child, when the child wants to, free itself, go to the toilet and say, do it in the sand. You don't get that person going to the washroom after the person growing up. So it is starting with our children. And there's a whole range of WASH program around that, which is working on these attitudes. And I think that if the attitudes are changed, we can do it. Ghanaians are doing it somewhere else.
Right.
Why can't they do it in their own country?
Doc, we'll have this conversation again because there are so many aspects that we need to do in terms of development planning. Thank you for spending some time with us.